It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. The Justice Secretary launches an independent investigation into how a migrant sex offender was mistakenly freed from prison.
This was a mistake that should not have happened. The victims expect better, the public expects better, and this government expects better.
Angry and frustrated, Sir Keir Starmer responds to a report highlighting the billions of pounds wasted on asylum hotels. 24 hours in the kill zone, a special report on how high-tech drones have changed the face of the war in Ukraine. Guilty of truly reprehensible crimes, members of a Romanian grooming gang are jailed for exploiting vulnerable women in Dundee. Jamaica braced for the worst as one of the strongest hurricanes on record in the Atlantic barrels ever closer.
How long have you known about Andrew and Epstein? Have you asked the police to cover up?
Accosted about Andrew, the king is heckled over his brother's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein as he greets crowds outside Lichfield Cathedral. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Good evening. The Justice Secretary told the MPs tonight he was livid that a migrant sex offender was mistakenly released from prison last Friday before being captured again 48 hours later. David Lammy said Hadish Kibatu had been released due to human error, but it's an error which has provoked widespread outcry. Kibatu is a failed asylum seeker, convicted of sexually assaulting a teenage girl and woman in Epping. He's due to be deported tomorrow. There will be an independent inquiry into what went wrong. Prisons across England and Wales have also had to introduce enhanced checks before inmates are released, prompting questions about how an already overstretched service will cope. Sky's Molly Malone reports.
Hadish Kibatu, the asylum seeker and sex offender who was freed from prison by mistake, is now back in custody and due to be deported as early as tomorrow. But still, plenty of questions for the prison service and the government about how this embarrassing episode ever happened.
Mr Kibatu was scheduled to be transferred from HMP Chelmsford to an immigration removal centre, from which he was to be deported. Due to what appears to have been human error, he was instead released into the community. This was a mistake that should not have happened. The victims expect better, the public expects better, and this government expects better.
And now a promise that an investigation led by Dame Lynn Owens, a former director of the National Crime Agency and Deputy Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, will get to the bottom of what happened, with changes to the releasing process effective from now. We've obtained these documents at 5 pages long. They're a new release checklist for a more senior member of staff to carry out, with sources suggesting it could add up to an extra 40 minutes of work per person. The main change is that a duty governor will now be responsible for implementing each check the day before. There's a specific list of questions covering foreign national offenders, and it asks the governor to make sure there are no deportation orders in place when the inmate's discharged.
I think there'll be more stringent and more robust procedures in place. I would hope they would introduce staff training, and I would hope that they robustly manage the system and overhaul it so this never happens again. We're here to protect the public, and this is a failure.
I'm arrested on suspicion of sexual assault on a female under 16 years old.
Kibatu was arrested in the summer for the sexual assault of a 14-year-old girl and a woman in Epping. His crimes happened days after he'd arrived in the UK on a small boat, and his case was a high-profile one from the start, sparking a summer of protests and political debate. But the reality is that this is a problem that's on the rise. 262 people were released in error in the year to March. That's more than double the year before. And while this inquiry will look to establish exactly what went wrong in this case, this is a system that's not working, that's under pressure and subject to scrutiny.
It's partly to do with the churn in prisons, it's partly to do with inexperienced staff, and I think it's partly to do with the fact that there have been so many different versions of early release schemes that people are just getting confused.
Successive governments have long been accused of sticking plaster politics when it comes to prisons. They are institutions that are ultimately supposed to protect the public and rehabilitate offenders. The events of the weekend make even the basics look difficult. Molly Malone, Sky News.
Also tonight, the Prime Minister says he's frustrated and angry after a report found the Home Office has squandered billions of pounds of taxpayers' money on asylum hotels. The Home Affairs Committee said flawed contracts and incompetent delivery left the department unable to cope with a surge in demand, relying on hotels as the solution.
We inherited a huge mess in relation to pretty well all departments in government, and that includes the Home Office. If you take the issue of asylum hotels, for example, we had years under the previous government where they didn't process claims. So tens of thousands of people didn't have their claims processed. They were then housed in hotels. That was the policy of the last government. There were 400 at the height of it. It's now about 200. I'm determined that we will close those hotels. We're processing the claims much more quickly, and where people have got no right to be in our country, we're removing them at a higher rate than best part of a decade. So we're taking the action, but I can't tell you how frustrated and angry I am that we've been left with a mess as big as this by the last government.
Well, let's speak to our political correspondent, Mari Aurora, who's at the Home Office for us tonight. Mari, the Prime Minister clearly very angry there, but what is he going to do about it?
Well, exactly. That's the key question, isn't it? What is he going to do about it, and how soon can he do something about it? You saw from that clip he reiterated that promise that he said he is going to end the use of asylum hotels by the end of this Parliament, if not sooner. We are expecting more information and details about that in the coming weeks. Steve Reid has already alluded to that, the Housing Secretary. But nonetheless, this report, I mean, it is pretty damning. Let me just give you a few elements of it. It talks about how the asylum system is a completely failed system. It says it's expensive, it's unpopular with local communities, and it's completely unsustainable. It criticises the system for actually not using the mechanisms that are actually there to penalise some providers for things like poor performance, for instance, and also for not reclaiming excess profits. And those two mechanisms have been underused, this report says, by the Home Office, which has then failed to keep those costs down. Now, speaking of costs, I mean, if you look at the amount of money that is being spent. So in a 10-year period, the amount of money being spent on asylum hotels has tripled. So it went from £4 billion to £15 billion. This is a huge amount of public money, of course. And the other thing to remember is when it comes to reclaiming some of that cash, the government have admitted that they're owed about £46 million they haven't yet reclaimed. And they said that they are auditing at the moment, and then they will try and reclaim that afterwards. But the report really talks about a flawed contract design that is partly fueling some of this crisis, completely incompetent delivery in the Home Office, and therefore making the Home Office unable to deal with the surge in demand for asylum accommodation after the pandemic. And it also talks about how the culture has changed in terms of, at first, this was a kind of stopgap, a temporary solution using asylum hotels. It has now become a go-to solution, really the norm. And that is a cultural shift in the Home Office, purely, really, it seems, out of panic from the amount of demand they've been having to deal with. And they conclude in this report by saying that without a government clear long-term plan and also what they call institutional capability to actually get an effective model up and running, they say that we're going to see more and more of this. And so actually the government is arguing they are going to close these asylum hotels down, but in the meantime, clearly huge amounts of public money is being squandered, and this report just really lays it in stark reality.
Indeed. Mari, thank you very much. More than 3 years since Russia's so-called special military operation in Ukraine, the fighting has been relentless. Front lines have become places where soldiers risk their lives in craters and on the ruins of abandoned buildings in a deadly game of cat and mouse played with drone technology. Our team has spent 24 hours in what's called the kill zone, a crucial area in the Donbass, the region Vladimir Putin wants, but President Zelensky won't give up. From near the town of Dobropilya, our international correspondent John Sparks sent this exclusive report.
In this fight for national survival, in the contest for American support, Ukraine is struggling to hold its ground. The diplomacy is disorientating, but the battlefield is worse.
It's the command center.
We've spent 24 hours with a National Guard unit called Freedom Force, who've been thrown into the war in the Donbass. This is their underground command center.
Раніше війна, яка була велика, окопна лінія, за нею стоїть артилерія, спереду стоїть піхота. Зараз це трохи не так.
Now, both sides contest a kill zone, where soldiers conceal themselves in holes and ruins, where drones hunt the enemy from the sky. But we were about to witness a more conventional attack.
Через 3 хвилини вийде танк на рубіж відкриття вогню. Ми побачимо, як танк знищує орків.
From the control room, we see a Ukrainian tank moving at speed towards the factory, where Russian troops are hidden in the ruins.
Abrams.
How are you protecting the tank from Russian drones?
Оці от мангали, як нашивали росіяни на початку війни, всі з них сміялися, але дуже ефективний засіб для захисту танку. І, да, він повністю обшитий.
Щоб ти бачив танк і завод,
The tank also has a jammer, which disrupts the frequency used by enemy drones. But the Russians have found a way round it. Some drones are attached to hair-like cables. They can't be jammed. And there's a flash as the tank nears the factory.
Розрив по танку. Це...
Smoke cover?
Ні, це, скоріш всього, FPV вороже відпрацювало.
A first-person view drone has disabled the treads. The vehicle is stuck. Then the tank radio crackles.
Можна підлітати. Веди карандаші. Москіт, веди карандаші.
The tank crew decide to make a run for it, and the control room try to reach them on the radio. The commander's call sign is Bender.
Бендер, не залишайтесь, давайте до водонапорної башні, Бендер.
Зенітчики біля водонапорної башні. Скажи, пускай не заходить в хату, по дорозі біжать.
The control room tries to guide them to safety by recording messages, then broadcasting them on an aerial drone.
Скажи йому, запиши йому, повернись в окопну лінію.
And after 40 nerve-shredding minutes, Bender and his crew reach a position of relative safety. Their terrifying ordeal is almost over.
Все, людей вдалося довести до безпечного місця, вони зайшли на позицію наших хлопців, і як зменшиться туди увага, ми вже їх евакуюємо. Танк, на жаль, втрачений, але така війна. Але...
The following morning, we found Bender and his crew after their extraction from the battlefield in an armored truck.
Do you think you've been fortunate? Do you think you've been lucky?
Пощастило. Це велика удача.
It is big luck.
As Ukraine's allies think about how or whether to support it, these men must rely on each other. The preservation of the nation depends on it. John Sparks, Sky News.
And you can watch John's full report on the Sky News app. Now, members of the Romanian grooming gang have been sentenced to a combined total of 68 years in prison after being found guilty of sexually exploiting 10 women in Dundee. 4 men and 1 woman were found guilty in January of dozens of offences, including rape. The ringleader was described in court as a smirking, winking pimp. Our Scotland correspondent Conor Gillis has the story.
The arrogance of a rapist on full show for all to see. The Romanian ringleader of another grooming gang in another city, this time Dundee. Driving the streets, they trapped 10 troubled local women as young as 16, raped, violated, manipulated and conned, thinking they were girlfriends of their Romanian abusers, plied with crack cocaine before being blackmailed into sex.
This case was particularly shocking because the victims were hand-picked because of their vulnerabilities. The criminals were prowling the streets of Dundee looking for women who matched the conditions that they knew would make them particularly vulnerable, and then off the back of that exploited them sexually on a sustained and brutal basis.
And these are the predators, arrested by detectives investigating sex trafficking of foreign women to work as prostitutes. There was a video on the ringleader's phone showing a victim climbing a tree, this rapist threatening to leave her there because she didn't make money.
They're deplorable. They've had no thought as to the impact this is having on the victims. It's been quite controlled in that they knew what they were doing. You know, the fact that they're trying to get them onto controlled drugs has helped them keep control of the females and kept them coming back for more.
Officials say this vile trade is commonplace in communities across the UK. And detectives in this case have told me there are potentially a dozen or so more victims. But the biggest challenge is when those extremely vulnerable people do not recognise that they have been groomed. And officers hope that by this gang now being behind bars, they may have the confidence to come forward.
By offering them an apparently unending supply of mostly free crack cocaine, you exacerbated their vulnerabilities and then proceeded to exploit them for your own sexual gratification and whims. By contrast to the evidence given by each of you, the women were careful, credible, and convincing. Your victims are now survivors, albeit no doubt permanently damaged by what you did to them.
Authorities here appear to have acted swiftly, but even the talk of this triggers tensions in what has become one of the most polarising debates in Britain. Conor Gillis, Sky News, Dundee.
The King has been heckled by a protester in Staffordshire asking him about Prince Andrew's relationship to the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
How long have you known about Andrew and Epstein? Have you asked the police to cover up for Andrew? Have you asked the police to cover up for Andrew?
The monarch was meeting crowds as he visited Lichfield Cathedral when a man asked him how long he'd known about his brother and Epstein. The King did not respond to the question as the man, believed to be from the anti-monarchy group Republic, was led away. Nigel Farage has dismissed accusations of racism against a Reform UK MP who complained about adverts being full of black and Asian people driving her mad. The Reform leader said the remarks made by Sarah Poshin were ugly and wrong, but resisted calls for her suspension from the party. He said he didn't believe the intention behind her comments was racist. The woman accused of stalking Madeleine McCann's family has told her trial that she's still questioning her identity after claiming to be the missing girl who disappeared in Portugal in 2007. 24-year-old Julia Wandel told the court she had limited memories of her childhood and could only remember abuse after experiences with her step-grandfather. She denied claiming to be Madeleine for attention or financial gain. In Jamaica, the Prime Minister is urging people to stay indoors or follow evacuation orders as Hurricane Melissa heads towards the island. These are the latest live pictures from Jamaica. It's strengthened into a Category 5 storm, the most powerful on record to threaten Jamaica. Forecasters have warned it will bring flooding and landslides, causing widespread damage across the island. Our science correspondent Thomas Moore examines what could happen.
In Jamaica, they are preparing for the worst. The island's strongest hurricane in recent history is expected to bring intense winds, flash floods and landslides. Some areas have been evacuated.
This hurricane is moving so slowly. It's not going to just come and move on. And it's going to really, and I hear it's 25 inches of rain we are expecting here. We are going to be totally flooded. So my heart goes out to the persons who live in those areas in terms of not knowing what is going to happen to them. But we continue to pray.
This is Melissa, seen from the International Space Station, a vast vortex of wind with maximum sustained speeds of almost 160 miles an hour. Satellite imagery shows lightning flashes within the eye of the storm. Hurricane Melissa has been tracking west, but it will veer sharply north towards the island, strengthening into a rare Category 5 storm. If the wind speeds are maintained as it makes landfall on Tuesday morning, it will be the strongest hurricane in the island's recent history, possibly passing over the heavily populated capital, Kingston. The rain could prove even more damaging than the wind. Melissa is moving at just 5 miles an hour, so it will take several hours to cross the island. The eastern half could get between 50 and 75 centimetres of rain over 4 days, but parts of the interior could get 100 centimetres. To put that in context, London gets 62 centimetres a year. That deluge is likely to cause mudslides in the hills and flash floods in low-lying areas. Melissa started life as a cluster of thunderstorms off the west coast of Africa earlier this month, tracking west and becoming a tropical storm north of Venezuela on October the 21st. But over the weekend, it rapidly intensified, fueled by some of the highest sea temperatures on record for the Caribbean at this time of year. Satellite measurements show the water is around 2 degrees warmer than normal. According to Climate Central, the odds of such warm water have been increased by at least 500 times by human-caused global warming. Without climate change, it would have remained a weaker Category 4 storm. Melissa will be the third Category 5 hurricane of the Atlantic season, which starts in June and ends in November. Only 2005 had more such strong storms. Melissa has already lashed Haiti and the Dominican Republic. The islands only caught the edge of the hurricane, but it still caused extensive damage and deaths. Aid agencies fear the impact on Jamaica could be catastrophic. Thomas Moore, Sky News.
Well, a short while ago, we received this update from NBC correspondent George Solis, who's in the capital, Kingston, in Jamaica.
A lot more fears and a lot more concerns as Hurricane Melissa, now a Category 5 storm, churns towards Jamaica. It could make a historic landfall. Officials today putting residents on alert yet again to make those last-minute preparations to weather this event. Now, officials also really worried about those residents in those low-lying areas that have not yet evacuated. We have been to some of these communities where residents say they have weathered a number of these storms in the past and they feel they can do it again. We're talking historic storms like Ivan, Gilbert, and Hurricane Beryl last year. To that end, the government's still sending buses there to make sure people have the option to leave. Emergency shelters have also been opened across the island. Officials saying none are full yet, but they do expect that to change in the coming hours, especially as these conditions begin to deteriorate. Now, here in Kingston, the forecast as it stands isn't calling for those major hurricane winds, but we still might get those impacts of some of that tropical moisture, some of those tropical winds. So conditions here could get dicey into the evening hours, especially as the storm gets closer and closer. It is slow moving, and that has always been the concern here, that as this storm continues its track, it is going to dump essentially buckets of rain here on the island, really putting lives at risk with catastrophic flooding and some landslides and mudslides as well. Stores were open for as long as possible. People were in them buying up as many supplies as they could, from food rations to water, batteries, anything they would need to hunker down for an extended period of time. Locals, of course, as I mentioned, very concerned, but you also have tours here that are also stranded, for lack of a better word. We've spoken to a few of them in the north side of the island, in communities like Montego Bay, Ocho Rios, one couple who's here on their honeymoon, saying they considered evacuating, but right now there are, of course, no flights as the nation's airports are shut down. They believe they'll be able to weather the storm.
Well, British tourist Toby Lindley-Smith is on holiday in Jamaica with his family. He told us how they're preparing for the hurricane's arrival.
So obviously when we arrived 3-4 days ago, Melissa was just a low-level tropical storm in the middle of the sea. So there was no warning because there was nothing to warn, you know. So it's escalated so much. So yeah, the hotel they've given us lots of advice about what to do, barricading the windows, trying to put mattresses up against them. As an emergency, you know, diving into the bathroom or into the shower if it gets really bad and the windows blow out. You know, no circumstances going outside or opening the windows. I mean, a lot of stuff that's kind of obvious, but again, for us Brits here, it's unprecedented. So yeah, it's good to have that kind of basic advice. And you know, they've been good with the food. They've been giving us parcels to kind of store in our room. I think our main worry is really is obviously flooding. We're right on the coast, as you can see behind me. Hopefully the surging isn't as bad as it could be. I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much social media. And also the aftermath, of course. Like, you know, what do we expect tomorrow afternoon? The storm is supposed to have passed by then, but, you know, what will be the state of the island and the people here? So that's what we're all really worried about. And of course, ourselves. I have 2 small kids. So, yeah. Not an ideal holiday, let's put it that way.
New laws to protect social housing tenants have come into force, requiring landlords to urgently fix dangerous conditions like damp and mould. The rule change, known as Awab's Law, is named after 2-year-old Awab Ishak, who died in December 2020 from prolonged exposure to mould. Sky's Katie Barnfield spoke to Awab's dad, who says he repeatedly raised the issue.
At just 2 years old, he was killed by the home that should have kept him safe. In 2020, Awab Ishak died from constant exposure to black mould in his family's Rochdale flat. His dad Faisal complained for years to their social landlord, but nothing was done.
He can't breathe, so sometimes it's getting worse and worse. So when they take it by the ambulance in the hospital, I was driving. And when I used to arrive to the hospital, and they said, yeah, your son is unable to make it. And it's really hard time with me. So because I lost my first child and suddenly, and I couldn't got anything to say in that time. So yeah.
After Awab's death, the government promised to act. Now the first part of a law named after him has come into effect, designed to force social landlords to fix dangerous problems like damp and mould.
I feel grateful and happy to. It's my honor to at least I change the law and people getting benefit from it and people get support as soon as possible.
Awab's law now means that social landlords have just 24 hours to fix emergency hazards and serious damp and mould. The next part of the law, covering more issues like fire safety and excessive cold, comes into force next year, with all remaining hazards covered by 2027. The government says eventually it will extend the regulations to the private sector, but hasn't given a date for this yet.
What these regulations mean is that there are very clear legal timeframes by which landlords have to respond, and tenants can take legal action if they fail to do so. We do urge the government, though, to implement further phases of these regulations as soon as possible.
But some are sceptical about whether the law will make a difference. Greater Manchester Tenants Union work with people in social housing living in poor conditions and say little has changed since Awab's death.
I think it's got worse. It's shocking. You know, we've had people come forward where their children have been hospitalised because of damp and mould in the properties, and this is since Awab has passed away as well.
I think I don't want to hear any complaint or any problem with that same issues when I just went through. That was my hope to get change.
Although it will never bring Awab back, his family hope the law that came from his death will be enough to protect others. Katie Barnfield, Sky News in Manchester.
That was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the Daily Telegraph's Associate Political Editor, Tony Diver, and the Guardian's Deputy Political Editor, Jessica Elgott. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of The Guardian about tonight's top story here on Sky. Its headline, Ministers warn not to scapegoat prison staff over sex offender case. To stay with us, we'll be right back.